It is Bloomberg Business Week. Tim Stenovic and Carol Masser live in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Do you want AI involved in your brain surgery?
If it's really good.
Okay, the reason I'm asking
well.
is because China is actually testing an AI assistant for neurosurgeons at 7 hospitals in Beijing. The bot's going to answer questions with citations based on more than 1 million academic records. Could help with CT scans, images. Eventually, though, the researchers envision the AI taking a more active role, warning doctors from pursuing risky procedures, for instance.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about this, right? We have a great guest to talk about this because, you know, the idea of having AI helping in the operating room could be an issue of trust. But you do wonder, you could have a doctor who's had a little tired watching the Oscars or doing something else, and you do wonder about that element. So there's a lot at stake here, and we've got a great guest to get into it.
Yeah, Michelle Giuda is CEO of the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue. She's also former Assistant Secretary of State for Global Public Affairs. That was during the Trump administration from 2018 to 2020. Michelle joins us from Austin, Texas. Michelle, good to have you on with us. How are you?
Good to be with you.
Well, good to join. I'm so glad you're joining us on this because we've been talking a lot about AI, as you can probably imagine. But you and the team over at the Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue, I got a poll on our radar from Edelman, and we talked to the Edelman team a lot about their trust barometer. And this one specifically has to do with trust in AI companies declining. It's not just here in the US, but it's around the world too. How can companies that are working on this technology earn the trust of us?
So thanks for that question. I've seen that poll, and it says that about 35% of Americans now trust companies to do what's right when it comes to artificial intelligence. But let me give 2 other numbers for you. The first is 2030, which is the year that China has stated that it wants to lead and dominate in artificial intelligence. The other number is $51 billion. And that's how much China is committing to science and technology, which is up 10% from last year. They just announced this coming out of their National Party Congress. And I share those because there's important context in terms of the trust that we are putting in our government and in our tech companies to innovate properly when it comes to artificial intelligence. But it's not happening in a vacuum. That is happening in the context of a competition with adversaries across the world who want to use these technologies, dominate in these technologies, and compete with us in order to advance their value system and their systems of government, which are authoritarian, versus ours. So that's really important context. But this notion of trust is so central. And it's not about the tech, it's about the trust. And the good news is we don't just have to rely on government to get it right. We don't just have to rely on tech companies to get it right. And what the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue is doing is also making sure that citizens are involved in shaping this, that they have a right and they have a responsibility in order to help shape and dictate where AI goes. I'm here at South by Southwest in Austin. This is a gathering every year of creatives and leaders in media and in innovation. And that's why we're here having conversations around, well, what is the necessary role that you play in national security and in geopolitical competition? So it's getting everybody involved.
I'm curious.
And here's 2 practical ways to do that.
Well, hold on. I just want to jump in real quick because if there is one thing that unites Democrats and Republicans, like there's only one thing, I think. It's kind of beating up on these tech CEOs when they do testify. And we did see in recent weeks examples of the way that Democrats and Republicans do not think that companies like Meta Platforms have guardrails on the way that they're serving content, the algorithms that they're using to feed content to, for lack of a better term, minors here in the US. So I'm wondering how you can rely solely on companies to actually get this right without involvement from government or without relying on government.
Yeah. Well, I would add and maybe challenge what you just said. There's actually another really bipartisan issue in DC, and that is winning the competition against China, and specifically on technology. And so with that context, it isn't just about relying on tech companies to get it right, whether it's in the US or in any of our like-minded partners and allies countries. And it isn't just relying on government. One good example, talking about bipartisanship, is there's a new House bipartisan task force on artificial intelligence. So you've got leaders in the House across both sides of the aisle coming together to think about how do we engage industry in the right way, engage the public in the right way in dictating what role artificial intelligence plays in our lives. That's a great place for those who responded to the poll and said they don't trust companies and they don't trust government to get it right. then working with and getting involved with the members, there's 12 members in that House caucus and that task force, is a really good way to do it.
How do we do that? I mean, companies are going to be very careful. They don't love regulatory oversight. They don't like what they might deem as extreme regulatory oversight. I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate. So how do we create quickly the right private-public partnership on this? And to be fair, it's got to be global. None of these companies are operating in a vacuum, right? We've seen this with financial regulatory oversight, and often Europe has led. We think about kind of climate, Europe has led. So how do we do this in a smart way and quickly?
It's interesting. You actually see companies, Microsoft, for example, trying to lead the conversation on AI and essentially saying, we're not going to wait for government regulations to figure this out, and we're actually going to put out a proactive point of view on what we think some of the guardrails might be and initiate that conversation with government, not only here in the US, but to your point, in Europe and across other parts of the world. And that was a lesson learned, I think, from social media, where we're flipping the script now and seeing private sector companies try to initiate that conversation. And that's a good thing because, look,
Do you feel like, can I ask you something though, Michelle? Do you feel like the world has learned their message on not having enough oversight on social media? And I know we get into a free speech, it's complicated, right? It's not so black and white. But have we learned the lesson that, you know, not having enough oversight in social media and content and, you know, the false content that gets out there, the content that can hurt in so many different ways, have we really learned the lesson so that we get it right this time around when it comes to AI?
I definitely think you see some changes. So, for example, when Facebook came out, Twitter came out, there wasn't a House bipartisan caucus on social media because we didn't know that we needed one. And that all came after the fact. So now in the early days, you have things like this task force in the House trying to get ahead of it. You have companies, I mentioned Microsoft earlier, trying to get ahead of it. But here's the thing. We don't want to rely too much on and point the finger at government to say, go figure it out. Because if tech companies and innovators don't know where the technology is going, our government leaders sure as heck don't know where it's going. And so this has to be a collaborative conversation, not only with the innovators and the high tech companies and with government leaders and policymakers, but also with customers of those tech companies and constituents of those politicians.
How can we trust them to do it right? Come on, because they make money over, you know, having more eyeballs, the velocity on social media platforms. How can we trust tech companies to do the right thing here?
Well, that's where I don't think it just has to be a, hey, we're going to trust you and I'm going to sit here and watch and be a spectator and I hope you get it right. Whether it's asking that of tech companies or it's asking that of governments, it's, well, then what is the role of a customer? What is the role of an end user? And what is the role of a citizen in getting involved now on the front end in driving that conversation?
Hey, Michelle, we only have 30 seconds left. Should the U.S. force TikTok's parent company to divest TikTok?
Well, the U.S. is giving them the option to divest or be banned. But yes, because ByteDance is a Chinese company. They're required by law to provide information to the Chinese Communist Party, and it's a surveillance platform and it's an influence operations platform. So it is a national security issue.
I feel like we scratched the surface. Will you come back soon? Tim's angry because I got like 3 questions in a row with you.
Never again.
We have a ton to talk about.
Come back. Michelle Giuda, she is CEO of Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy over at Purdue, joining us from Austin, Texas. I'm sorry. I got a little excited because how do we trust them?
I want to talk to her too.
How do we trust them?
I'll call her after.
To do the right thing. All right, now he's not even going to listen to me. All right, you're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week.